Previously on Work to Game. What are we going to be talking about on Thursday?
Can't be news. There's not news.
We can make up news.
Are you kidding me? Twice news. We're predicting news, guys.
Oh my gosh, what if big news does drop on Thursday?
Balance versus utility.
Oh yeah?
Speaking of homogenization.
Well, the wheel knew that there was going to be news today, and there's a lot going on over at TGS. If you guys want to know our thoughts, be sure to sound off in the comments below. We can put together an extra video going over TGS for you guys if interested. But today, the wheel has also dictated we talk about balance versus utility. It's a constant war, even within my own self, if I'm being honest. I want to be a unique black mage. I want to be, unique in this world, but I also don't want to be disadvantaged. And that's essentially when you look at content, that's what this conversation is going to be about. Chris, I know you got a lot of real passionate thoughts on this. Let's kick it off.
Yeah, I mean, but between the two of us, we have 30 years of MMO experience. And every expansion, you want your previous job to carry over. So you want that balance. You want to know the world first race wasn't just due to some comp that was unfair. You want to know that you're going to be welcome into groups, and that there isn't somebody so much better than you that people don't want to play with whatever job or class you are playing. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, when we talk about the Final Fantasy universe, you talk about things like sub jobs. Mm-hmm. In some games, you talk about class identity to an extreme degree, right? In this game, we literally have a job living within a class so that it really just hones in. You have your own quest line, you have your own relic, you have all these things, and there's this identity there, and you want that to be protected, and you can't ever have all of one without just getting rid of the other. So it's a question of balance. Do you try to get everybody where they're on the same playing field, in which case you homogenize things? Mm-hmm. And this is a lot of where we see issues with the fact that dungeons can feel stale and all that, is that you have to design the mechanics to cater to every possible composition in the game. So I want people to be able to play. I don't care if one job or class is the weakest for the duration of an expansion. That's my personal thought. Because that's a risk that I'm willing to take, and I understand we're going to leave that person behind, and I think that's why we have things like catch-up mechanics and all that. That is coming from somebody who has had to change job, spec, class, role over expansions to remain competitive in World of Warcraft. I've played Druid the majority of expansions, but I have multiple specs within Druid that I've had to stick to. I played Hunter for one expansion. Within 14, I started as a black mage, and I moved to warrior because the need for tanks just got so big. And as a warrior, there have been plenty of times where I felt pressured to move to a different tank, especially as I started to consider things like Savage and all of that. If I really wanted to be optimal, then there have been times where another tank might be considered more optimal.
At the risk of being the negative view in this regards, because and this comes from my history with MMOs specifically, because the nature that I have always viewed the beauty of the MMO is it's kind of this living world that exists virtually, and just like real life, there is essentially in real life, people have advantages and will excel at certain things, and people will have disadvantages and not be essentially suited for certain things. And obviously this is a game, and so that there's obviously like caveats that it's like we don't need to bring injustices into the virtual world because just so that we can have some form of similarity here. But where I'm coming from, especially as it relates to Final Fantasy XI is where I grew up. Essentially, I've seen kind of a Twitter meme about that. People, this is where I grew up, and they post a picture of a game that they played a lot when they were young, and now into Final Fantasy XIV, and especially from 1.0 to 2.0. So there's been drastic shifts in the game. What I'm getting at here is the idea, obviously, of that uniqueness when it comes to how I build a character, as opposed to just playing, like a hero shooter. A hero shooter is, here's your kit, and this is your kit, and we'll adjust those things accordingly. Wherein in an RPG, I've always felt like the time that I spend with my character is an investment, and I'm going to make decisions, and those decisions will be good or bad. With 14 and with 11 specifically, you play one character, so you have an identity within that character. I'm boring Chris now. He's just waking up.
Just tired.
Yeah, no worries. I just thought it was like perfect. Like, Brian, come on. You have that character, and you can play all the jobs. You can change, and you can go and shift, thus giving you flexibility. So if it's the mindset of, do you bring the player, or do you bring the job or class, and like is the phrase. And I think that within the world of 14, being that I can change, that should be what solves that. Rather than the player than the character. That should be where that kind of comes in, and then you can still build out accordingly. Obviously, meta is always going to dictate it, but I've been there for massive shifts in the meta, even with Final Fantasy XIV. Even when Garuda was introduced, it was discovered that you could just go in with black mages and you could beat her before she did her big attack. And I thought that was just something that's just beautiful and broken. I think that's the thing, is that we live and we try to get to this mindset of balance, but it's like the Matrix, right? You kind of feel like they said, we built a perfect world for you. We're getting a notification. Thank you, Grant, for hitting that subscribe button. You should do so too if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Thank you, Grant. We built a perfect world for you, and you reject it. Like, it just doesn't feel natural.
It's boring.
And there's a risk of that. Like, there's obviously, when it comes down to certain bits of content, that's why I've found the concept, not the execution, but the concept of Blue Mage exhilarating, is because it gives you the player choice, and hopefully to bring more of that. And ultimately what it could end up being, if we see more limited jobs introduced, if we see more of that expansion kind of played around with, is that it could be a system in which that, okay, yeah, the current expansion, we're going to preserve that. We're gonna lock that in, so you're not gonna sit here and be like, well, sorry that this does not work for black mages for this raid scene. Sorry, we can protect that, but then the rest of the game, it's like, well, we've played that, we've been there, we've done that. Now we can break the living hell out of it and allow for some more flexibility. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen classes rotations change expansion to expansion, and because of the way level sync works, we do see that somewhat locked in. And it's what makes, when they add jobs to the game, like Red Mage and Samurai, it's what makes those feel really funny in old content, because that content was never designed with them in mind. And so
makes them feel powerful.
Red Mage at low level is a wonderful experience. If you don't want to level it up all the way, but you do want to try something really fun, go level up Red Mage just a little bit. You are going to tear some things up. It's awesome. And it's old content, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't break anything. Just let them be ridiculous. It's fine. It's like, well, they can take on Arm Veil. Great. Perfect. Do it. So I personally don't care about balance in old content. I think it leads to unique things in kind of the social fabric. And one of the things that limits 14 in my mind from the potential it could reach is that we don't use our old content well enough.
Okay.
And so if letting go of balance in order to create really fun and unique ways to engage with the content would lead to more using of old content, we have a huge library of content that was wonderful for its time that doesn't get used enough. And it does get used some. Leveling roulettes are incredibly popular. People are leveling up all these different jobs. The game is inviting new players in all the time. Shadowbringers has brought in more new players than ever before. We just revamped part of the new player experience to invite these players in. So, like, I'm not saying it doesn't get used. It just doesn't get used as much as I feel the content deserves. And in order to make it more engaging, let's give classes unique ways to engage with it. I personally feel that, like, the job quests and the role quests is an incredibly interesting idea on how to go chase down the identity of a class, and not just from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah.
Let's put some hard mode job quests in there, and let's go see just how good you are, right? Like that earth, sky, air, sea, or whatever DPS meter. What if that had you moving as a black mage? What if it made you move? But then for other classes, it didn't. What if as melee, it kept kind of like positioning so that you had to adjust to get your positionals? What if as a tank, it dropped tank busters? Like, let's teach you to play your job, and that is going to be a unique experience for each class. And I'm not really worried about whether or not those are equally difficult to each other. I'm not really worried about whether or not in a 4-man dungeon the jobs are equal. I think at a world first level, at ultimates, we need to chase that balance, and then whatever that trickles down to the rest of us, which means things like more difficult jobs. If a job has a more complex rotation, it's going to be lower performing at the casual level because they had to balance it at the top level where a floor ceiling is much higher. So skill ceiling up there is much higher, but down here we're all not hitting the skill ceiling. We're making mistakes in our rotation. That job may have a lot of fall off, and that's perfectly fine in my opinion. The other thing to think about, and I want to pose this to you, is if you do balance the jobs perfectly, how do you then design encounters when you have a black mage that doesn't want to be as mobile as a melee class? How do you design an encounter so that they both have equal amounts of uptime?
To an interesting degree, I think you kind of, at least when I was listening to you talk, solve that problem or answer that question in and of itself. And I look at the Mass Carnival for Blue Mage. It's challenging, but it obviously plays to the strengths and the build variety that the Blue Mage has. It would be interesting to see them bring that level of kind of concept to the other jobs as well, so that as a player, you had that ability. It's like, yeah, we're going to really kind of like look at your job and we're going to design content that is going to be specific for that, but it's going to challenge you in unique ways. I think that's the factor here, because when we talk about this whole subject, there is obviously the undertow or the hint of the multiplayer game versus the single player game that we've even covered in previous discussion topics, and it's that when playing with multiplayer, you would hate to be matched up with a class that cannot perform in the content that you're in, because that's a wasted Q pop. All of a sudden we get in here and it's like, hey, this guy, this content it hurts everybody by him playing in there, and so I'm definitely not advocating for that. I think when you look at that uniqueness, they could look at the game as a whole and bring that into the like a single player mindset. That's AKA what they've kind of designed with Blue Mage, but I'd like to see it done with Black Mage, with Red Mage, with the tanks and things like that. And I think that'd be kind of neat as just a way of like, here's something else to add that we can start to actually like, we know this is what you've got, this is the skill ceiling, how close to and where do you fall into play with him. And still though, when we look at the content, I think the core issue, and if anybody's has been following us for any period of time, they're probably going to know what I'm about to say. It comes down to matchmaking. If I want to bring a different layout, a different setup, matchmaking is that fast way which I use and benefit from, and everybody does benefit from. It has a place, but the fact is that with the fact of matchmaking, the content then has to be designed for everybody. You take out that fast match, that pairing, then all of a sudden you can say this content isn't designed for black mages, and awesome for you, a black mage who did this. That becomes where the difficulty would scale by the content. If everybody going into that multiplayer component.
That's a fair point. You have to balance it because it's not fair to other people if you get paired with two black mages in content that was designed so that they play something else.
Right. So if you're like, Brian, I know you got a black mage, let's try this. Let's get creative. And that's the thing that I feel that I miss the most, that I saw happen multiple times within Final Fantasy XI and even Final Fantasy 1.0, is that, oh, guys, like there was even a point, I think, in 2.0 with Summoner, like go in as a Summoner to Ramuh and let Titan be the tank. And Titan could tank the boss, so you didn't have to bring a tank. So an 8-man group tankless, letting Titan do the job would be able to do, and they patched that out, and that broke. I was like, oh man, because it's not a part of that, that normalization, that homogenization, right, from a content perspective, because it becomes unfair. Nobody's going to get automatically matched without a tank in the content, and that's itself. And so I think that's where then lots of questions come up. That's where, like, me saying this, we could all sit here, like, everybody can agree. Like, everybody that I've talked to, like, oh, I'd either love sub jobs or I'd love to be unique. And then you say the cost of that is you can't say, cue me up, find me a party. And they're saying, no. Like, we want our cake and we want to eat it too. I want to be able to look at it and I want to be able to eat it in this case. And I'm very curious about the future of MMOs. Like when we look at Blue Protocol, if you guys haven't seen, what they're doing is something interesting, is that they're letting you have leveling on your gear. They're letting you have skill trees and kind of building out your thing. They're letting you have all of these different things that make you unique. And they're assigning all those different things a score. And they're saying, if you want to be able to match for this content, you have to at least hit a score, a battle score, not just a gear score, not just a physical level.
That's going to get gamed.
Oh, I'm sure everything it will be. Like this is like at the end
and by accident. There's going to be people that have a high enough score to get in the content and they've accidentally combined into a terrible build.
It's going to be interesting to see. Yeah,
it's right. So I think a different way to approach that would be to play whatever build you want in free play, right? Mm-hmm. Picture Diablo 4 or Diablo 3. You're out in the world, you're running your own rifts, whatever. When you are ready to do matchmaking, you need to go do the equivalent of whatever the content you're going to matchmake for. So let's say you're going to matchmake into Greater Rifts. You need to go run a solo Greater Rift, and you need to prove that you're at a certain level. Mm-hmm. So without changing your build. And then that build is now locked. That build has been assigned a rating, where that rating is also going to factor for your skill level and things like that. That would be a more fair way to do that, but I'm interested to see how that lands for Blue Protocol. That's an intriguing concept.
At a core, that's why I'm excited to see it.
That math,
because I think that all these companies, when we talk about all these different multiplayer games and how they address like the scope creep and the life of these games, that hey, all of a sudden it's been 10 years and maybe this piece doesn't make sense today. Like that's why I'm really excited to see how does this end up. Does the community enjoy this? Does it end up solving this crisis? Because if it does, and you could bring back like really unique builds to a multiplayer RPG, that would be like, hey, Blue Protocol figured it out.
The meta is going to say highest eye level. It's going to say you have to have the highest battle score, and that's not to be the highest damage. Mm-hmm. So this happens in WoW a lot. So in WoW, people look at eye level a lot. And
we do that in 14, yeah.
But in 14, highest eye level often means best gear. In WoW, there's all these lateral upgrades, and different expansions have been bigger offenders than others. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you have, let's say that you have a trinket, which is an auxiliary slot, and your auxiliary slot causes you to resist magic damage. So as a warrior, I can resist magic damage. And that's important because we're going to go against a series of bosses and there's a magic one. Now, because of the amount of magic resist on here, this thing is assigned an eye level relative to all other resistances. And then I've got another trinket in my inventory and it's a slightly lower eye level, but it's straight up fire resist. That's it. Now, when we go into the fire only boss, that second best in slot should replace the first trinket, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's going to be it's going to be better as a tank. I'm going to resist more total damage by switching to the worse gear. I'm going to have the lower score.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue when you look at things like physical resist versus magic resist, physical damage versus magical damage, things like that. You have to scale for the encounter. And so my concern is that there's going to be somebody who finds some synergy where, say, we have skills that are scored 1 through 10. Mm-hmm. A level 2 skill is going to cause my level 10 skill to function as a 15. So instead of equipping,
But you get that, and you find that out by having like me and you in a raid and doing the content, and you saying, "Hey, Brian, did you know?" Like comparing these things in a group match, all of a sudden this ties back. Well, you have to parse, but this also ties right back into the what we talked about, where you don't pay my sub, which was like a great video in and of itself, where it's like all of a sudden you're like, hey, if you actually take the 2 skill and the 10 skill, that actually that's gonna be better for you overall, and then somebody's gonna be like, no, it's not, and then I look at all of these problems, and it comes down to, like we talked about this before, briefly one time, you're more likely to work with somebody if there's a cost to you and that cost being time. I don't want to run all the way back to the city. I don't want to have to shout for a party. Okay, I'm just like, this guy's maybe not optimal, but we're going to figure this out because we're here. We've invested the time already. Where in matchmaking, it's just so easy to say, nope, dismiss, and done. And and as somebody who enjoys matchmaking, I think the mindset, and I'm sure we'll get this comment in the comments below regarding that. everybody thinks that they're not the problem, and I'm guilty of this. Like, oh, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to go into this content and going to be doing great. And maybe, and hopefully for the majority of time, I've added to that party. But everybody thinks that, and then sometimes you find at the end of the day, your gear is suboptimal, like your rotation is suboptimal, and everybody else is carrying you forward. And that's not, and that's just where I kind of come back to the mindset is I don't have a solution. And that's the thing that frustrates me at the core of it, because I wish it's like there's perfectly good opportunities and times when you get matched with a great party and you clear the content in 10 minutes and everybody's like, that was awesome. And then nobody ever talks to that group again. It's like, man, if the game was able to find you better ways of saying, hey, here's people who you're going to like and you've had good experiences with, let's try to get that relationship built. So you're not using matchmaking, but you're using, party.
I'm sure 2/3 of players probably think they're in the top third. So some of you are wrong. And that could be myself included. And sometimes I'm aware of it. As somebody who puts out guides, I know I'm playing poorly during the content and then I edit it. So I'm sitting there watching myself objectively miss my rotation. Yeah. Because I'm busy paying attention to mechanics or whatever, or I'm talking, or I'm just bad. So I think to sum this all up as we kind of wrap it up, it's not, there isn't a balance or utility, and people shouldn't find themselves in a balance or utility camp. It's a question of how much of one are you willing to give up to slide it a little further towards the other. How much balance are you willing to give up? Are you willing to admit that Duty Finder is going to break if you get truly unique class identity? And are you willing to admit that that skill that you really enjoy that makes your class feel unique might be given to some other classes so that the party has it when you're not there? Things like shared limit break, to make sure that you don't have to be there. In the name of balance, that we're going to have limit breaks shared across role. That's a balance thing. It would be way more unique if every job had its own limit break, but that's not balanced. So it's interesting. It's just a question of how much do you want over the other.
Let us know, guys, in the comments below what especially if you could put a percentage on it, right? Like how much versus one thing versus the other. Would love to hear your thoughts on this subject. Chris, like, you just pretty much wrapped this up really well. You summarized it, I think, perfectly. I think it's time we spin the wheel and find out what we're talking about next. Oh,
come on.
The wheel wants us to talk about the news. Guys, if you want us to cover some news, let us know in the comments below. What are we talking about? Oh, somebody literally just in the last video was like, please have PvP on that board.
What would fix PvP in 14? And do we even need PvP in 14? Do we fix it, or do we just get rid of it? Do we just leave it?
Oh man, this is going to be a great topic, guys. It's either going to run on Saturday or Tuesday, so just keep it locked here to Work to Game. Hopefully you're enjoying these videos. Let us know if you did, and if it got you subscribed, just like Grant, sound off in the comments below. Let us know if this is the video that you hit that subscribe button on, so we can officially welcome you into the workforce. For Work to Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
And man, what a great topic. Thanks so much for watching. I'm very excited to talk about PvP, but we'll see you soon. This video is sponsored by me, Ginger Prime. Hopefully you'll check out my podcast channel, Ginger Gaming Radio, which we have lots of guests, lots of great conversations, and even more highlights. Links are in the description below. Let me know what you think. Thanks.